Oh my God, this is so exciting. So this is Traci Harrell, and I am here with Miss Jen Sawyer. And we're going to be talking about this concept of being a champion, an ally. And you have an interesting story. Angela was telling me some things, and she gave me her contact information. So tell me, what is going on? I heard you were an ally extraordinaire. I'm calling it a Jedi champion, a justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion
Ooh,
champion.
that sounds very sophisticated. I like it. Yeah, so it's been interesting. So I've been affiliated with this organization that it's a business networking group that's global, huge organization. I think it's in over 30 countries, and uh, they have been around for, I think, over 35 years, very effective with helping people grow and build their business. Angela is a part of this. That's how she and I met. And I became one of the leaders sort of in this organization, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. And I've been in it for 14 years. So it was exciting to sort of be in a position to be able to like affect
You
supporting
say
other businesses.
14 years?
14. Yeah, I took a little break when I had babies, but yeah, I've been like in the network and sort of like part of the community and been like leaning on these relationships essentially the entire time that I've been self-employed and had my own business. So it's done a lot for me to grow my business and create, all of my dreams of like what I wanted to achieve for my life and my business and all of that. But it kind of really I became more aware of the lack of diversity that existed within this organization and within these like sort of groups of business professionals that were coming together a little over a year ago. Like kind of after I got settled into my leadership position, I started to like experience more of like, who are the other leaders in this organization and what do these other chapters look like? Because when you're in your own little group, you're just like, oh, these are the 30 people I see every week, and you're kind of not really aware of like what's happening in the rest of this like global thing, right? So it became more apparent to me that we were very white. I mean, these groups of people that were meeting together to support each other's businesses, build community, build lifelong relationships, were all pretty much white people with very rare exception. So I had gone to the person that sort of runs our region around that time and was like, I feel like this is an issue we should be discussing and maybe doing something about. And she was like, oh yeah, totally. I would love for you to champion that. Like, you should basically get on that, right? So it's sort of just like left to me to sort of figure out of like, that was something that should be a priority, I guess. And so, I mean, I'm in this like leadership role, meaning I'm basically not paid hardly anything to do like a whole bunch of work, and I'm already like managing my own business, being part of my own group, raising small children, all the things, and then I'm gonna like single-handedly take on this like global national effort to like diversify an organization that's been established for 35 years by a bunch of old white guys, right? I mean, no offense to old white guys, I have lots of old white men friends, but it's like it's hard to shift that culture, right? So I was like, okay, great, I'll get right on that, like by myself, single-handedly. So I just kind of like got distracted with life, right? And then COVID happened. And then we started meeting online, these organizations, instead of meeting in person. And so the community was still continuing. Well, then of course, everything, happened with the BLM movement really taking hold, and the country just sort of really banding together to help support Black lives and bringing these conversations to the forefront. I was like, yes, because I've actually been a champion for minorities since I was little. I don't know where it comes from exactly, but I just sort of inherently, I remember the first time I ever heard a racial slur, I was probably 4 years old, and it was actually my stepfather, my mom's new husband. He had a coworker who was a Black man come over to the house for something. And I remember after he left, my stepfather, called him a racial slur. And I remember at 4 years old, like wanting to cry. Like I was like, what is that? And I didn't even really know what it meant, but I knew it was wrong. And I like, from that day, I've just been like emotionally invested in like people being treated with dignity, with respect, and as equals. So that's my backstory of just like, I don't know, I'm just an empath, I guess. So I just like, I see something that's not just, and I want to do something about it. This is who I am. So anyway, fast forward, everything's happening, in these recent months with the Black Lives Matter movement. And Angela comes to me, and we're good friends, and she's like, hey, his this organization, I won't even name their name, but has this organization come out with a statement about Black Lives Matter. And I was like, we need to know. I don't know. They should have. I'm sure they have. Like, of course, I'm thinking, of course they have, right? Every major, I mean, NASCAR at that point had said Black Lives Matter. I was like, if NASCAR said it, everyone must be saying it. And so I called up, you know, my leader, the person that I report to, was like, hey, what's the stance here? And she didn't know. And so then she sent me to the national, like the president basically of the national, you know, region, and he was then on vacation. So I'd sent him an email. He didn't answer because I guess he was on vacation. So then I literally emailed the CEO of the organization, of this like 35 country or whatever organization. And I was like, hey, like, right, like we need to know what is this company's position here? Are we supporting our members of color? Like I don't see anything like publish. What's the answer? And it's like crickets. And so then I'm like, wait a minute, like, are we as an organization that's in over 30 countries, like, this isn't something we're taking a stance on? Like, I'm just so confused. So it kind of turned into a group of us, a small group of us who are really passionate about this needing to be addressed. Continuing to do a letter writing campaign, an email campaign, posting on social media, like the sort of figurehead of this organization had a live Facebook event. We all showed up and we were like asking these hard questions. We're like, what's the position? Does, you know, this organization support Black lives? Like all the things. And it was just every single thing was being censored. Every post, like everything that was public was like being censored and deleted and whitewashed basically. So then I'm starting to get angry. Because I'm like, okay, you might have been slow on the uptick, but now you know that there's a need for leadership. And instead of leading, you're just going to scrub everything. So that's when I was like, no, like we need to really push for real change. So we, myself and another person in leadership at the same level as me, kind of championed creating this, you know, basically anti-racism and inclusivity council for our region to bring people together to start these conversations, figure out how we were going to affect change, while also pushing CEO level, president level, director levels to say, we expect you guys to show up and to do more. And thus far, it's still been a real lack of leadership. And I'm at the point where I think it's probably time for me to say goodbye to this relationship that I've had for 14 years, because it's like there's on one level, I'm like, okay, Jen, you should stay and you should do the work and you should affect the change because you're in a position of privilege to do that, you know? And so I'm grappling because I'm like, I want to stand in allyship with my friends of color who need me there to support them. And at the same time, it's been so over and over again demonstrated that the culture doesn't want to change, like the leadership doesn't want to change, or they do in like a PR kind of lip service way, but not in an actual fundamental, like, let's have the difficult conversations kind of way, right? So I'm at a crossroads right now, like at this very moment. I just got off the phone right before coming into this Zoom with you to talk to another person in leadership within this organization to say, hey, what are you doing here? And, you know, because I know he wants to see some things change, but I think is also afraid of like rocking the boat and sort of the white fragility in the room. And I'm just like, I gave a presentation to one of my chapters yesterday and I was like, let's talk about what it means to be an anti-racist. Let's talk about what the definition of inclusivity it is. Let's talk about what it means to have an inherent bias and how do we identify that and not shame ourselves about it, because we all have inherent biases. Every person on the planet has inherent biases. It doesn't have to be anything we sit there and like, you know, shame ourselves about. It's just about acknowledge and then correct, right? So I'm all about like, it's okay that you make a mistake. I tell my kids this all the time. It's okay that you made a mistake, but now you know you made a mistake, and what are you going to do to change it next time? Because none of us are perfect. We're all making mistakes every day. I'm sure I've said something in this Zoom that someone's going to judge as a mistake because I'm, you know,
well, the fact that you had to get yourself some lipstick on, I don't know. I'm feeling
I need more makeup. I
with
should
that.
put on
Look
mascara.
at my hair blowing and looking crazy, and you all cheeked up. No, I'm just joking.
Oh my gosh. I know, it's just the sweat. That's all.
Actually, I think you're amazing, and what I really love about this, you know, is the fact that you don't have all the answers, yet you're willing to step up. I called you at the beginning of this call. I said, and I was just talking to another lady, a white lady, who said to me, if you need um, what was her quote? If you need a white lady. She said, reach out to me. She's the one who used the Jedi term. So when I said you were a Jedi champion, she's like, I'm a, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion
Love it.
Jedi. And I was like,
Yes.
okay, I'm going to use that moving forward because if you think about what I'm asking people to do, what we're asking people to do is basically raise their level of consciousness.
Right.
The actions should follow. And I started this whole conversation, like people talk about courageous conversations. That's the start. I think at the end of the day, I'm pushing for something beyond a courageous conversation. I trademarked this term because I wanted to make sure people are using it properly, but I'm calling it courageous activation. And they need to be positive, right? Rooted in positive psychology, rooted in what I'm using the term adaptive leadership. So that to your point, we all are learning and growing together. We create a safe space to learn and grow together. No judgment.
Right.
No judgment. Courageous activation is not saying go defund the police, right? I'm not saying we shouldn't change funding, et cetera, et cetera. But what I'm saying is do it. What I'm talking about specifically, and I wouldn't even begin to address the criminal justice system. There's too much heat there.
Yeah.
A lot of emotion there.
Yeah.
I choke up when I think about what's happening there. I think that system, I've done a lot of work around systems change. That system is so complex. I leave that to the experts, right? Who can, address the different levels of municipalities, from state and federal and local and county and all. There's a lot there, right? And I'm grateful for those people who are willing to and able to kind of effect change there. But what I want to do is focus on what we can do in business and organizations, from Microsoft to McDonald's. Like I said, from the CEO to the janitor, we all have an opportunity to change how we think about justice and equity and diversity and inclusion. It really is a Jedi move. It's a Jedi mind move, right? Like we really gonna have to think about it differently, and it can't be just diversity. Right.
No.
It's not about bringing more people in.
Yeah, and I literally just in that presentation I gave to one of my groups yesterday, because I knew they'd be mostly receptive, so I was sort of like testing the waters and I'm very much like, I'm gonna go rogue, and I don't know approval to do this from anybody really, but I'm just doing it anyway because they can't really stop me. Like, I'm in that position, so till they fire me, I'm just gonna keep stirring the pot. But I started off with talking about really what is the difference between diversity versus inclusivity, right? Diversity is what you see in the room, and inclusivity is how welcome do those people feel, right? The people that are the others, like, do they actually feel like they belong there? Do they actually feel invited and welcome and included? And so I think that is where organizations mostly get lost. And I actually was on my very, very first diversity training council over 20 years ago when I worked for an almost all white, all male game company. Okay. So like, this was like hardcore white, overweight gamers. Right. And even then that company had a diversity training, effort. And so that's the other piece too, is I think about this organization I'm in now, that's this global entity. And I'm like, really? You guys don't even have a thing? Like, how have you gotten this far? I don't understand. But anyway, that aside, I do think like people get hung up, organizations, companies get hung up on, oh yeah, we really value diversity. And it's like, but that's not even like 10% of what is needed. I mean, honestly, like, that's great. You have your Asian and your Black people and your Hispanic people. That's wonderful. But do those people, are they being given the same opportunities for success as their white counterparts? Or is there an environment that's fostering? Because I just, I know the history of the woman that's been put in charge of the National Task Force to champion these issues, a Black woman. She's been fighting for her position within this organization for years because the guy that was her boss was super racist and hated her and like held her back from numerous promotions for years, and it's like, she's persevered and, thank goodness she has, but it shouldn't have to be like that. And the organization shouldn't have made her wait 2 years to start this diversity task force, right? Because in the wake of this movement, like, why was this not a priority to them 2 years ago when she brought it up?
Interesting. Two things you said as you were telling the story. Yes, and I agree with everything you're saying. So please know that. Two things you said, which I found really interesting, is you said I'm just, as an ally, you would consider yourself a Jedi. You would basically say, I'm in it to win it. I've been
I mean,
connected to the cause.
I'm trying to be an ally, and I also realize there's an evolution of what that means. And it's hard to know, like, how do you present as an ally? Because on one hand, I want to stand with Angela and just say F this and burn it all down because I don't think they want to change. And then on the other hand, I'm like, but if I leave my position of privilege and don't affect change from within, am I an ally? Like, it's actually, even being an ally is like not clearly defined of what does that look like, and different people might describe me as one or not depending on how I decide to move forward in this, right?
Well, and I first of all, that's why I want you, and I'm excited to have you as a part of this panel discussion that we're doing on 9/9 as a part of this broader initiative, because I think what's super exciting is there are no right answers. My answer, someone else's answer may not be your answer. And I think that's the beauty of this concept of adaptive leadership. It means different things. I wish that it meant that we had a script that was one size fits all, and that everyone knew when you do this, this, and this, that means you're an ally. And if you find something that's wrong, you must leave the company and/or burn it down. Do we really want to? I mean, I struggle I struggle clearly.
Yeah.
I think about what's happening, oftentimes in the street. Protests, I'm all behind. I don't think anyone wants to see things burnt down, especially in neighborhoods. And then those are the neighborhoods that need it the most,
Right.
to be uplifted the most. So I think I definitely struggle even with that concept, the term. I know we said it jokingly. But one of the things that Angela said is that the organization that you guys are part of, you're deciding whether or not to disband officially.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, both both debates of what you do have value,
Right.
both valid. I can't wait to hear what happens. And the truth is, if I had to vote, which I have no vote, but I'm gonna put my 2 cents in anyway. I think there's value. You gotta have people on the inside and you gotta have people on the outside, by definition.
Yeah.
Right? The revolution shall not be funded, but at the end of the day, you gotta have people who are in a position of privilege and in a position of power who are allies. That is critical.
Yeah.
If we all leave organizations where there's, things aren't right, then
they'll just stay wrong forever. Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I grapple with that because I am a person who I consider myself an agent of change. Like, if I commit to something, I do it all the way, right? Like, I don't it's like it's a downfall, actually. Like, if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it, or I'm going to be dead. Like, one of those two things is true. So that's where I am struggling, because I do want to commit to this. I haven't, like, officially said, like, I'm in this. I told Angela,
commit to what?
with you. I told Angela, like, I stand with you. If you decide to leave the organization, I'm with you. I mean, she's the only, to my knowledge, the only Black woman in this organization in all of Seattle. There are lots of Black women business owners that could be in this community, this business community. There's one. So when
I happens to be your president, correct?
Right. Yeah. Well, she's the president of her group, right?
Oh,
and so when I say I stand with her,
tell me about that.
So there's sort of different groups of businesses that meet, and so there's, like, basically they're like sort of subgroups. So that's why when I was saying I was in this group organization for 14 years, but I was in my little group, I didn't see, like, the broader, now that I'm in this leadership position, now I visit lots of these groups. So I see sort of, like, what does the diversity look like in these other groups? And there isn't any, like, so it's like, oh, this isn't just an issue with my group. It's actually, like, region wide, right? So that's where I started to become aware, like, this is probably something we need to be talking about. And that's where this sort of journey all started for me. And then Angela, as the only Black woman in my, kind of local Seattle region, I was just like, I'm with you, girl. Like, you tell me what you want to do. If you want to stay and fight, I will fight with you. If you want to go and burn it down, I will light the match. Like, just tell me what you need. I mean, I'm not, because that's all I can do is just say, how can I support you? How can I be here? you know, in allyship, and because I'm going to do what I think is best, but at the same time, if like I'm representing what, because the thing that I appreciate about Angela is she really has tried to be patient with this organization in asking them to stand with her and asking them to demonstrate that they actually care about her life, the life of her son, the life of her fiance. Like, she's been emotional, she's been raw, she's been honest, and she's been patient. And this has been months, right? And the last meeting that we invited one of the leaders that actually has power to like affect change, really, because I have like this little tiny piece of crumb of power. I have not that much power, right? So this other person that we invited into the fold that actually has power, you know, she heard the voices of the few members of color that exist in this region that showed up and actually like shared their voices, they were authentic. They pushed back on her statements in defense of the status quo, on her statements in support of protecting the white fragile, you know, response. And they pushed back and they were just kind of like, but listen, but like, you're basically saying like these people's discomfort is more important than me as a person of color being uncomfortable coming into a room of all white people, not feeling welcome, being asked if I'm lost, you know, being asked like if I'm there to serve the breakfast, you know, like the assumptions made when you're a person of color in a room of all white people, right? And so like after that meeting, instead of like sitting on that and saying, gosh, that was hard, right? Some of those things were hard to hear for me. But now I'm starting to understand like what these members of color have experienced and the barriers to entry that they're facing. Instead, she just came back with a response of, I'm not going to participate in this in the future because I felt disrespected and I didn't feel like it was productive. And I the only response I could have to that was, I'm sorry that you felt that that wasn't productive, but I can swear to you that for every person of color in that room that for the first time had someone who was actually in a position of power to affect change, for you to make time to hear them, to actually listen to their voices, that was productive for them. And for your response to be that that was disrespectful to you because you were uncomfortable, that was the moment, that was actually the moment that I was like, I don't think I can affect anything here. Because without somebody even willing to be uncomfortable for all of 45 minutes, who's in that position of leadership and power, you can't change an organization's culture if they're not willing to be uncomfortable for 45 minutes of their life, to give a safe space for people of color to express their experience. That's like a tiny little launching point. That's not even the hard stuff. So that was the moment where I think I realized I probably have to go. I probably can't actually change anything here, at least not in the time frame that's worth my lifeblood, right? Like if I'm going to invest my lifeblood into like equity work and helping lift up people out of systemic poverty, or people that are, you know, maybe minority owned businesses that have no network to turn to that doesn't have all these barrier to entries, like maybe I can be someone that can create something totally different that doesn't even look like this organization, that's just an actually truly inclusive and attainable opportunity for people of color who want to start a business. I mean, I've been thinking about doing, you know, basically consulting work to help lift up people that want to start a business that have no means, that have no support system, because I didn't have a support system when I did what I did. And I know what that looks like, and I know the struggle that is. And I'm like, if I can be a person that's helping support those people, because I've made it, right? Like my business is thriving, I'm doing great. And I would rather just sort of give back to people on an individual level than invest like all of my life and energy into this organization that will take decades to culturally change.
Interesting. So let me ask you a question. Thank you for that.
Sorry, I'm a shocker. Did you get that? I should have mentioned I'm a hairstylist.
Is that why your hair looks so amazing?
And that's why I talk so much.
Oh no, I love it. I'm taking it in and loving every minute of this conversation, just so we're on the same page. So I have two follow-up questions for you. I take it back. No, I'm just joking. But I said, I don't know. But you, I mean, I think you would agree that you have to have people inside and people outside. I'm not saying you have to be one of the
For
ones on the
sure.
inside, but I think to effectuate, to truly, actually change, you got to have some pressure from the outside and pressure from the inside. I think the voices from the inside need to be elevated. So my question to you is, are there no other, I mean, this is an exploration as an ally, because I think you have to feel supported as well. I think oftentimes people want to support, and rightfully so, people who come to work saying, I didn't feel as comfortable, I got pulled over today and I didn't think I was going to make it home, right? Like my heart skipped a beat, because I didn't know I
Yeah.
was going to make it home. Yeah, we need to make sure the trauma that is being experienced is comforted.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of energy, to your point, with allies as well, right? There's a lot of displaced energy. You don't know what to do. You don't know how to affect change. You don't know if your efforts are making a difference. If, to your point, do I stay or do I go? You know, what do you say to someone else who's feeling like you?
You know, the approach that I've taken, because I'm still making my decision of like, am I going to stay and do this fight? But I'm making preparations to hand off the baton in the event that I don't stay for this fight, because I know there are other allies. I've had deep, meaningful conversations with them where I'm very clear that we're exactly on the same page. I think that in some ways, I'm maybe not the most effective person to lead the charge within this particular organization, because I do think they need a sort of tempered approach to change, and I'm not super tempered, to be very honest. And so I think that I'm very aware of who I am, what my strengths and what my weaknesses are, and I've tried to align with other people that I think have the strength, the conviction that I have, but the strength to know how to actually get buy-in and get like a slower pace of change. I'm exhausted. Like, I've been fighting this for 3.5 months. I've spent, without exaggeration, no less than 30 hours a week for like months fighting this. Like, I have spent a tremendous amount of my personal
Wow.
life making this an important conversation that continues and grows and brings more people into the fold and creates more advocacy for this, because I'm unwilling to go out without a bang. I'm unwilling to not have made an impact on some. I may not be able to be responsible for like big sweeping changes, but I am going to be an agent for change to start. And I'm going to make sure that if I leave, that the people that are carrying the baton are aligned with actually the right goals in mind. You know what I'm saying? Not just little baby crumbs, because I'm not down with crumbs. Like, I want a whole sandwich, you know? I think that what I would say to the other white allies who have maybe been doing what I've been doing, and they've been putting up the fight and they're comfortable with, being in the ring and all the things, but then it's like sometimes you got to tap out. You got to have someone come in and tap in for you. Like, create those allyships with your other friends who are white allies so that you can tap each other in and out. Because frankly, in this situation with Angela, I knew it was too emotional for her to have to be the one fighting the fight for herself. And then I'm like close to her, and I'm a deeply empathic person. So it's been very emotional. And there have just been times where I have to just step back, because it's too painful to actually to get that text message that I got from that woman saying that she felt disrespected. Like, it was just such a moment of like, I've maybe never been that disappointed in my entire life, honestly, because this is a woman in leadership that I respect, that I look up to as someone who is a leader and someone that has like the power to affect change, and I think maybe has a good heart. But it was like that message, that sort of gaslighting of like all these other people's experiences, because like you were uncomfortable, like that you couldn't even step out of your own discomfort to put yourself in their shoes and really just try to empathize enough to just get over yourself. Okay, like, get over what's uncomfortable for you, because these people are living in an uncomfortable space everywhere they go, because we're still in 2020 fighting for basic human equality. Like, I don't understand anybody that doesn't want to like just fully light it on fire and burn this institution of racism down. I don't understand. So yes, other white allies, you got to have allyship with your other friends that are white allies, and you got to lean on each other. That's all you can do, because you can't stop fighting, because it won't change if we're not fighting. It just won't. Like, there's only the percentage of Black people in our nation, they're not in mass numbers enough to change this without our support. You're just, it's just not going to change without our support, just in sheer numbers. So I'm thrilled this movement has gotten huge. I'm thrilled that there are more white people standing up and saying enough is enough. I mean, I've been having these conversations, like I said, since I was a child. So this isn't new to me, but I'm thrilled that other people are coming into the conversation. And I'm also appreciative of like people willing to be like, everyone's on their different space in the journey, and that's okay, right? Like somebody that just literally started to learn what the term white privilege means, great, awesome. Okay, now let's take it to the next level, right? It's okay. There doesn't have to be shame or blame. It's just about knowing better and then doing better. That's all we can do, is just know better and do better. So I want to just see that from everyone in the world right now. And I'm not seeing that in this organization. I'm not seeing them really know better and do better. And so that's why I think I just want to invest my time in more meaningful ways, in places where I can actually affect real lives. Like there's so much equity work out there that can be done that's just going to be more effective than how I can influence this organization. And I'm leaving behind the tools with the other allies that are willing to carry that torch, right? And I know that they'll do the work. I know they won't drop that baton.
Well, I think you just honestly, you just shared where I was going to go. So I'm glad that I didn't speak. I'm glad I kind of asked you the question and let you kind of
Ramble.
exactly.
You can edit this later, by the way. You can just cut out all the extra.
No editing necessary. This was the absolute perfect flow. Because if you listen to yourself in the beginning, there was a question of, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. Then we talked about, well, you still got to change you have to have pressure from both the inside and the outside to really effectuate, lasting systemic change.
Yeah.
And then I heard you say that, as an ally, you have to depend on other allies. We have to kind of support each other, tap in and tap out as needed to refuel. Because it really can be exhausting work.
Yeah.
Exhausting, to your point, extra, outside of the real job. And then what I find really interesting is that when you said you've been with this organization for 14 years, as an entrepreneur, it's been part of your bread and butter, and you're willing to tap out.
Yeah.
Because you're not, because you feel like you've put the demands out there. You've coordinated significant months worth of effort, and you haven't gotten the change that you want. One of the individuals that we're going to have join us on 9/9 is someone who was, part of the original civil rights movement. She was the first one to, segregate her, to end segregation in her schools, in her school in Florida, which is where I'm from. And I think there's lessons to be learned from the civil rights movement based on where we are today. And I look forward to her sharing some of them. I think what you said and what you shared is exactly aligned with what was required for the significant changes that happened then. You just said, we can't do it alone. Like I said, we're in the third of 6 sessions.
Right.
7, 8, 8. The next session is 9, 9, right? And the first 2 sessions were over 80% Black. And I said, you know what? We got to bring, so this session is intentionally about bringing in allies, hearing the voices of allies, seeing the faces of allies, talking about what it means to be an ally, to champion a cause, to be engaged. And so when Angela and I connected and she told me this story, I was like, wow, that's divine intervention. Like how perfect that she has a story that, and allies. She had a story that really perfectly reflected what it means. It meant so much to her, just so that I'm sure you know this already as an empath. But when she tells the story, what's most comforting is that she knew that there was at least some people that cared about her. But organizationally, she's like, wow, what a disappointment.
Yeah.
But to know that there are people that actually care, about you, that matters. I mean, when you say
Yeah.
Black Lives Matter, Black pain matters, right? Black
Yeah. It's
businesses matter, right? Black uh, tears matter. And she said she was on a call and cried and said, "Can you
yeah.
bear with me? Like, it's really emotional for me right now." And then what was interesting, I got to take you to this place. So she said that she felt uncomfortable. She asked for some grace as the president of the organization to talk about where she was. And she said, in the room, you helped to create a safe space for her to tell her story. And there were others apparently that are in the region you brought together, and you said, having these diverse individuals tell their stories to someone in leadership who can change things matters. That definitely matters. But then I understand from Angela that there was some people who were in the room, not just the person in leadership. She felt supported by the group, but then there were some people who said, "Do we really have to talk about this Black stuff? I feel uncomfortable. Um, like I feel uncomfortable." And so then from what I'm understanding, can you explain to me that happened, and then the people in leadership said, "Okay, so you got some white people that are uncomfortable, you got some Black people that are uncomfortable," and you're like, "So all uncomfortable people matter." So, is there a choice? Tell me about that. Tell me about your thoughts. First, describe what happened in
Um,
your opinion, and then kind of like the balance between what you experienced and what you wanted to experience as an ally. What would you have wanted to see happen?
well, I mean, as someone who's an ally and as someone who is an empath, I think always struggle. I always struggle when someone is trying to express an emotion, an experience that they had that was deeply emotional or upsetting. It's always confusing to me when other people make that person's emotional outpouring about them. You know what I mean? It'd be like if you were sitting here and you were telling me about this time that you encountered, a white woman at the grocery store with short, sleek hair and a leather jacket, and she'd said some nasty thing to you. And then I started to be like, well, is she describing me? It's like, you're not even talking. It has nothing to do with me. This story isn't about me. This story is about you and your experience and an emotional thing that you went through. And you're looking like you're literally expressing this in a vulnerable way to seek for someone to just understand or even just acknowledge you. And so, my perspective on how any of these meetings that I've facilitated for this diversity council and inclusivity council have gone is like, if people are uncomfortable, that means we're doing the work right, because people should be uncomfortable hearing that someone was treated as if they didn't belong at this meeting when they walked in the door just simply because of the color of their skin, right? Or like it should be something that we're like, oh, well, I wonder if that was me. I wonder if that was my meeting. Was I the person that asked if they were lost? It's like, if you're uncomfortable, that's good, because now you're actually starting to think about, where do my unconscious biases show up? And how can I be more aware of not letting those rule me? Now, it's not about not having them, because we can't control our unconscious. We can't control our thoughts, like the instantaneous ones, the brainwashing that society has embedded into us. We can't control when I see a man of any color and any stature walking down the street in the dark, I automatically become defensive, because I have been in very bad experiences with men who have assaulted me. And so I'm already inherently biased about a man that I can't see clearly being in a space where I don't feel safe, or I don't feel like I'm in a space where I could knock on a door. So it's not the bias that's the problem. It's how we respond to the bias. It's how we choose to react. So if you're a white person living in the world and you see a person of color and you have an automatic thought, assumption, question about that person based on that, it's being A, aware that you have it, and B, not allowing yourself to respond to that brainwashing, because it is brainwashing. Or it's based on some sort of limited experience, right? I've been assaulted by men. Has every man I've ever met assaulted me? No. But there's a bias there because of my limited bad experiences. But I can't let that dictate that all men are evil, right? I have to put that in check. And that's true of every bias that we carry with us, right? Whatever bad experience we personally had, whatever bad experience we saw in the news, whatever bad experience our parents told us they had with whatever, like we have to be in control of how we respond to that brainwashing, whether it's our own brainwashing or it's cultural or it's familial or whatever. And that's where I struggle, is when people aren't willing to like look at, what am I thinking? Why am I thinking that? Is that real? Is that man going to hurt me? Or is this some past shit of mine that's coming up because of my experience? My one or two bad experiences doesn't dictate that every man is evil, right? And it's like, if you had one bad experience with a person of color, doesn't mean every person of color is going to be a bad experience, right? Like that's the shit that we have to get over. And it's really hard for people to step out of that brainwashed space and to just acknowledge. So in that space, in those meetings, when people are like, well, I'm uncomfortable, it's like, well, then we're doing it right. That's how I feel. People have to be willing to be uncomfortable or change will not happen. You know, I've literally at Christmas dinner called my mother-in-law racist. And it's not comfortable because we're having Christmas dinner.
And you're going to finish that turkey and ham before you leave. So
You know
we're
what?
getting to the pie. So let's just have the conversation and keep moving.
But you know what? Again, it wasn't about shame. It was about education.
Did she
It was
feel
like,
educated? How did it work in that situation?
you know, it didn't blow up, so that was good.
So you finished, that's what I'm saying, you finished the meal. I think when it works, you finish the meal, you get to the pie, and everybody's, you know, you keep it moving.
It's very delicate being a diplomatic anti-racist. It's a delicate thing.
Okay,
and
wait
it is
a minute.
a honed skill. It's a honed skill.
Hold on, you got to back up. A diplomatic
Anti-racist.
Tell me what that means to you as an ally. So you're an ally, you're a Jedi, and you're a diplomatic anti-racist. What does that mean to you?
I think what it means to me is it just means allowing space for people who aren't aware, who aren't self-aware, to be made aware without a lot of negative, I guess, like punishment, like without punishment, you know? So it's like, oh, okay, you're telling this story about this man that did this thing, and it's kind of a negative story about whatever his action was, and you've decided in the story to identify him as a black man. And my statement to her was, you know, it's really not essential for you to have identified this man's race, because what he didn't have anything to do with his race. He was a man that did a thing, right? And that's it. Like you identifying him as a black man is by definition racist, because you're kind of, in a way, describing that because he was a black man, like the way that she said it, it was like the assumption was made that, like, as a black man, he did this thing, right? This is like a typical thing black men would do type of statement. And so, you know, I just expressed, like, you could have told the exact same story without identifying the man's race, because it had no relevance to the story whatsoever. It could have been a man of any color that did that, but now you've put this layer and you've started to plant a brainwashing seed, right? When you talk about, like, oh, this black man did this thing, then it's like the next person that's like repeating that story is like, oh, my friend told me about this black man that did the thing. And then it's like, all of a sudden, like, because there's never anybody that's like, I mean, maybe now because of, you know, Karens and everything, but it's not like, I always say this to my partner. I always say, you know, when you are kind of, when you're kind of being like a hick and a hillbilly, it's not like anyone's like, oh, this white guy came in and just, you know what I mean? Like that's not ever a descriptor. You know what I mean? Like, you could be doing something that's like super typically white, but people are like, oh, I saw this white guy, you know, riding his 10-speed down the street and he knocked over a garbage can. Like, no one's ever describing the guy as white. If he's Hispanic or black, they'll describe him, you know, or Asian. But if he's a white guy, they're like, oh, this guy knocked over a garbage can. They don't describe him as white if they're just telling a random story. So, like, that's the type of stuff that I feel like that's the subconscious stuff that carries, and that's part of the layers of brainwashing in our society. And so, for me to call her out, I didn't do it in a mean or shaming way. I just used diplomacy to express to her that I don't really want that brainwashing around my children, but I wasn't mean about it. I was just like, there isn't any reason to like label this instance as having happened because this man was Black. And the way that you delivered that message is making it seem like this is a thing all Black men do. And it's not. And I don't want my children hearing that kind of language.
That's awesome. What did she say? What was her response?
She told me about her husband's Black friend, and then I told her, yes, I'm well aware of your husband's token Black friend. That's like an ongoing joke between me and my partner, because like there's this one.
There's no way I could have been racist, because I obviously
because my husband has that one Black friend. Yeah, exactly. It was like so textbook. I was like, oh yes, I know about your husband's Black friend. I'm aware. Yeah, it was so, yeah. And then that was just kind of the end of it. So I was like.
So were your kids actually there? And how old are your kids?
Yeah. They were pretty young at the time, but that's kind of why I wanted to nip it in the bud. It was probably 2 years ago. So they were like 6 or 7 and like 3. So I was just like, no, I'm not gonna allow this kind of thing around my children, because that stuff does, I mean, obviously your kids are mostly learning everything from you. I mean, sure, they pick up things from grandparents, but usually if you have like my grandpa, he called Black people coloreds, because that was the term of the era. And he was like an old ass white farmer that lived in an all white time. And he probably never saw a person of color, honestly, maybe in his whole life. So that was just what he was raised and what they were. So like, you'd hear him say that and you're like, but it's not like when I was a kid, we were like, oh God, like we were so mortified that he would say that. So it's not like my kids are going to be like repeating this stuff, you know what I mean? But it's still just like, it's offensive in every way it can be for, I just don't want to hear it. And I certainly don't want my kids feeling like that's normal. I guess I don't want it normalized. That's what I'm saying. You know what I mean?
I do. I love it. I love it more than I can deny. First of all, that was a great story. That was excellent. I'm gonna bring you back to the other part of. I'm gonna bring you to the other part of the question. The other part of the question was, as a leader, I'm gonna challenge you, Miss Ally.
Okay.
I'm gonna challenge you, diplomatic, anti-racist, Jedi champion, all of that. I'm smiling ear to ear right now. You've impressed me to no end, and I'm grateful that we are having this conversation to connect, this opportunity to connect. So I'm going to ask you back again about the all lives matter, all opinions matter, all uncomfortableness matters. So our friend Angela, was uncomfortable with the organization, how she was being treated, how she felt she was being supported, or the lack thereof. A white person in the organization felt uncomfortable that she was uncomfortable telling her story. What are your next steps as a business person? I heard you say that if you're uncomfortable, then congratulations, we're doing the right work.
Right. So
I respond to the person who's uncomfortable.
Yeah, I can tell you.
I have to take let me real quick. I got to take the white person's side to say we got to be uncomfortable because they're uncomfortable. But how do you respond to that?
Well, so I told you that I ended up sort of getting that message saying like I felt disrespected and I was uncomfortable and that didn't feel productive. And so I sent a message via email to the entire group of people that had been on that Zoom call, the one that Angela's referring to, where she kind of got pushed back and whatever. And I basically just called it out that I did not believe that it was fair that she was expressing the meeting as unproductive, because for those people of color who were actually being heard for the first time by someone with substantial power to affect change, that it was very productive for them to feel that they mattered and that their voices mattered. And that I pushed back and challenged her to reconsider if she's really representing all members like she claims that she is. Because and there were people in the room that had kind of pushed back on her during the meeting, and then I sort of reiterated this in my email. But it's like, you can't say that you are here to represent all members if your prioritization is the uncomfortable white members, which is essentially the organization is majority white by like a lot, okay? And so you're saying that like the people that exist in the organization now, the majority, which is white people, if they are uncomfortable, that is of a higher importance to you to manage their discomfort than it is for you to help reduce the discomfort to people of color that both exist now in the organization and those that may want to enter the organization. And so it's like, at the end of the day, I don't want to sit here and say like you have to choose a side, but you can't say you represent all members if you're actually primarily defending the status quo and the comfort of those people that already are in that place of privilege. So like I sent a kind of lengthy email following up and CCing everyone that was in that meeting to just say, I'm disappointed and upset that you felt this wasn't productive. Here's all the ways it was productive for the people of color in the room. And I also am disappointed that you felt disrespected when there was no moment during that meeting that I felt anyone was disrespectful to her. And I kind of pushed back on her to rethink of like, what does it mean to be disrespected? Does someone stating their experience, does someone pushing back on your protection of the status quo and saying, hey, but if you're going to protect the status quo, then who's going to protect us? You're saying all members matter to you, but you're not actually here standing in allyship with me. So like, how does that work? Like, how can you say that you're here for all members, but our discomfort that we're communicating to you right now to your face is you're disrespected by our own experience? Like, that's like textbook gaslighting. And so that was
for those who don't know what gaslighting is, why don't you add that in? I'm going to have you further.
So
and also I read the book The Anti-Racist, but I'm going to have you come back to that too.
Okay.
Because it does have a different, but let's talk about gaslighting and
so
why
my experience of what gaslighting is and my understanding of the definition of gaslighting, and someone could debate me on this because I haven't looked up the official definition, but my understanding in layman's terms is when someone expresses to you an experience that they've had and you come back to them with a response that essentially is saying, oh no, that wasn't your experience, or like turning it on to like how it's affected you. Kind of like what we talked about earlier. It's like, you're telling me your story and I'm like, wait, are you talking about me? No, I would never do that. It's like, but you did do that. It's like someone saying like, I would never say something like that. It's like, but you did actually say those words. Like, I was there, I heard those words come out of your mouth, I'm not making it up. And they're like, no, I would never say that, but I would never say that, but you did. It's like, that's gaslighting. It's when someone is like, no, you didn't have that experience. I know you think you had that experience, but that could never have happened because I wasn't there for that, or I don't remember it that way. So it's basically like convincing someone that their own experience wasn't a real experience. So for those members of color that are sitting there expressing their experiences and their frustrations, and for her to turn that around and say, well, I'm being disrespected. And it's like, well, wait, so you're making this about how this person's experience wasn't it was just a disrespect to you? Like, it's a little bit convoluted, but to me, that's like sort of a form of gaslighting because she's really turning it around and making it about her. You know what I mean? It's like, it's no longer about those people and their vulnerability and their sharing of their real life experience. It's just about how upset she was by it.
I don't think you could have defined that any better. I was actually going to read the definition, the textbook definition of gaslighting, and there's two: to manipulate someone by psychological means into questioning their own sanity. It goes on to say gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation in which a person or a group covertly sows seeds of doubt in a targeted individual or group, making them question their own memory, their own perception, or their own judgment, often evoking in them cognitive dissonance and other changes, including low self-esteem.
You know who it happens a lot? It happens to rape victims, like almost always, when they report rape to the police. That's where you see a lot of gaslighting. Women that are questioned about like their memory and their experience and what really happened. Like that's like and it does create a psychological, like that. makes you crazy because you're like, wait, do I remember that like did that happen? There was a whole documentary about that happening
Like
to a
what
woman.
exactly? It's
I
funny
mean,
that you brought that term up. I think I mentioned to you. I actually have a book that's in an international best-selling launch mode right now, officially launching tomorrow, called Ignite Happiness. And when I tell my story in this Ignite Happiness book, I actually describe this moment where I was, kind of having had a breakthrough, kind of a post gaslighting situation where in the middle of this situation, I thought, wow, I am free. Like, I know the reality of this situation. I thank God for the experiences that I had, and it was just very interesting. And I think the one thing people need to do when you're trying to tell your story, because I think it's a risk, and I had to come back to this, that I'm so glad that this included a combination of allyship, being a champion, admittedly not knowing having all the answers, but then coming back to telling your story and what that experience can be like, because you don't always get the same outcome or the outcome that you want, which is why what we're doing with this broader initiative is designed to bring a new level of accountability and a new level of um, support. It brings in a new support structure and a different power structure that says, with a bigger than me moment, you get to kind of call it out. Like, this feels like a bigger than me moment, right? Like,
mhm.
and even the word should be celebrated, because when you talked about diversity and inclusion, a bigger than me moment by definition is an opportunity to pause, right? Any feelings you're having, right? So there's a whole protocol we'll talk about later, but it's just really interesting that you were able to combine both your work as an ally, your work as a true Jedi champion, a justice, equity, diversity, and an inclusion champion, and then bring it back around to telling stories and how you may not get out of it what you want. You may not get the outcome that you were hoping for.
Right.
When these types of things happen, then it could be worse, because now you feel like if you were Angela and this was your job and you were feeling like, oh my God, I told my story and then my boss feels uncomfortable, it's now worse. Would you
Yeah.
agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. Yep. Yep.
But this isn't the direct source of your income, right?
Right.
There is some networking, there's the relationship building, there's partnerships. Like, I get that. But like, what advice then would you share with someone about telling their story? Because again, we have as an ally. I mean, we talked about building allies. Make sure you have some in the room,
Yes,
right?
that's true. Yeah.
The
I
importance of
mean, I
building
think,
allies when telling your story. Yeah.
yeah, I think I can't speak for how other allies like go through their lives and try to stand for what's right and for justice. I am a person who has been through a tremendous amount of I mean, I've overcome a lot of traumas in my life from childhood through adulthood. And because of that, I do know that I'm a survivor. And I do know that at the end of the day, it's much more important that with this very short lifespan that I have on this planet, that I am an agent of positive change, that I'm an agent of justice. And that will look different ways to different people. But for me, there's no question, like, especially now that I'm a mother, right? There's no question for me of like where I need to stand in the world to feel at the end of the night when I go to bed that my conscience is clear, that I've done everything I can to affect the world in a positive direction. And if I'm not willing to sacrifice and lose things in the quest for that justice, then I don't personally, this is not a judgment of what anyone else does, because we're all just trying to survive, right? I get that. But for me as an ally, as a white woman, as someone who's a survivor, as a workaholic, I'm not going to ever not be able to survive. But I will tell you what, I'm not going to stand by and watch injustice and not do anything, even if it's to my own detriment. So like, I'm nervous that this organization is going to come after me because I've stirred all these pots. I have a non-compete. I mean, if I go off and I do other things to help support other small businesses that are minority owned, or like, I don't know. I don't know what they legally have there. I don't care. I'm like, come for me. At the end of the day, like, that would suck. I don't want to deal with it. And at the same time, I'm going to try to do what's right in this world. My son, who's 9, has watched me have this fight, be fighting this fight alongside Angela and alongside these other allies. And it's like, what could I say to him to like just not have like stood up for what was right? Like, I can't personally go to sleep at night feeling like I could have done more. Like, this organization that we're talking about, I think everything that I could do to put into motion the wheels that have to be turning for the next years to come, I think I've been that agent of change. I think I've done the work to get that motor started. I don't actually think I can affect a lot more, but I think I can make impact other places. And I think that the people that are carrying that baton will continue to do the work, and I think that there will be impact. I think it'll be slow, but I feel good about what I've done so far. And especially in having this conversation and getting more clarity about like, what do I need to do at this point?
Sounds like we were helpful.
It is, and I'm a talker. So like, this is how I process things. Like, I
Me
talk
too.
through
Me
it.
too. Me too.
And so, yeah, I mean, I guess like my stake is, as an ally, like, I'm in it all the way. And just like I said to Angela, like, I stand with you. If it means burning it down, if it means I lose a bunch of business because I lose relationships because people don't agree with I don't care. Because guess what? I'm a survivor, and whatever I burn down, I'm going to build it back up. I'm not worried. I had a client, I'm a hairstylist. I had a client come in talking to me about the riots and, I just wish the violence would stop and all this about this movement. And they were like trying to appeal to me, which, this is cute, kind of. They were trying to appeal to me. They were like, well, they're burning, these rioters, they're burning down businesses, and, it's a pandemic and these businesses are already suffering, and that wouldn't be right. What if they just burned your business down and you just lost everything? And that's not fair. I just stopped them in their tracks. Like, I'm cutting this person's hair, and I just said, you know what? I'll tell you right now, that if this business came and got burned down because people were fighting to save Black people from being murdered at the hands of police, you know what would happen? I would call my lovely insurance agent. I'd make an insurance claim. They'd write me a check, and I'd either retire or I'd rebuild my business. But I'll tell you right now, I'll burn this shit down myself if it would save the life of one Black person. I was like, don't you dare try to appeal to me. Like, you're going to get to me like, oh, this is so unfair. No, what's unfair is that people are being murdered, violently murdered, that don't need to be. I can't remember the man's name right now because I'm really bad with names, but the man that was killed because he fell asleep in his car. That particular case, literally, I cried so much over that because I have literally fallen asleep in my car. I'm like a person that falls asleep at the wheel all the time, right? So I have pulled my car over on the highway, in grocery, all kinds of places, and slept in my car countless times in my life. And every single time a policeman has come and knocked on my window when I'm asleep on the side of the highway, because it's happened multiple times, every time they've said, ma'am, are you okay? Are you safe to drive? And you should take off because it's probably not safe for you to be sleeping alone on the highway. And I've driven off alive. They've never breathalyzed me. They've never asked to see my identification. They've never even questioned me of where I was going. It's just like, how can people not see this stuff happening and just not only be outraged, but just be heartbroken? So burn that shit down. I'll burn my own shit down if it could save one Black person from being murdered by police. I would do it myself.
Wow.
So all these people that are talking about, oh, this violence, you know what? None of those officers would have been arrested if they hadn't have burnt Minneapolis down. That's the problem. None of those men would have been arrested.
And it's interesting because I, as a Black person, I feel uncomfortable when I hear someone say, burn it down. I feel uncomfortable because I have a friend who lives in Chicago and different places, and they talk about it's their neighborhood. So now
No, I
they
know.
walk around and see the neighborhood burned down. They're not burning, and so the
Right.
idea of burning things down, it does make me feel physically uncomfortable. I don't even like to hear that or to use those words. Sadly, sadly, and most devastatingly, I unfortunately agree with you.
Yeah, I don't think that George Floyd's murderer would have been arrested ever if they hadn't done what they did in Minneapolis. I really don't. And that's the thing is I was talking to another client, a different client, and he was like, oh, George Floyd changed everything. I was like, no, George Floyd didn't change anything. Yeah, no, it all started with George Floyd. I'm like, no, that's not why things are changing. Why? And I kept saying, why are things changing? I kept asking, why are things changing? And he kept saying George Floyd. I'm like, it has nothing to do with George Floyd. I said, what was different about George Floyd's murder? And why was someone finally held accountable for his murder? Dig deep, think hard. What was different? They burned the shit down. That's what was different. That city was not going to do anything. They protested peacefully for like what, almost 3 days? Did they make an arrest? They had the video. They had it the whole time. When did they finally make an arrest? When shit was getting burned down. And it's heartbreaking. I mean, I don't want to see things burn. I don't want to see, I'm not saying, I'm not a person out there that's burning stuff. I'm very nonviolent, despite my aggressive attitude. I'm a very nonviolent person, actually. I believe that you can make more impact with words. The problem is that this problem is so deeply systemic and there is so little accountability that the only way to get change is to raise up the volume. And it's awful that we're having to go to that extreme.
Well, I mean, it felt like to me as I was watching, I hate to even go, this is not where I thought this conversation was going to go, but
Sorry,
I thank you. No, I'd like to say my show and this whole initiative, it's intentional but organic, right? We start
Totally.
very intentional. I wanted to start talking about allyship, being a champion. What does that look like? Telling your stories, consequences, how far are you willing to go? And you made it very clear. You're willing to go all the way. You're in. You're all in. You light your own match.
I'm gonna Thelma and Louise this shit if I have to.
Don't say that. Don't say that. We are a violent free.
Yes, I'm actually not an advocate of violence. I'm actually not. I don't want to make it sound like I am because I'm not. I'm actually
like it's the worst. It's like horrifying to me, honestly. The whole concept. I cut my cable off. I just turned it back on yesterday. Honestly, and not that I couldn't not watch.
Yeah.
I couldn't not watch my people, and it was interesting because as things were being burnt down, it was like, wow, these are white people burning stuff down.
I know,
I was
and that's the
watching
thing
so
too.
closely on CNN. I'm like, oh my god! So you did have people hijacking.
Yeah,
no,
for
I think
sure.
that's part of the problem too. Is you have these outside entities.
Totally. You're right.
Coming in and doing things and and I heard about some policemen that were almost barricaded into a police station and someone trying to light it on fire. Really?
Yeah, no, and I'm not advocating
come
that.
on now.
Yeah, I'm just saying like no.
I mean, police are. I would say in the majority of the police are our friends.
True. Yes, I agree.
And if we can believe that, we have to. I mean, I have to put myself. My father wore a uniform for a while there, and I was just like, I just think about people whose parents or siblings or who are police officers who are really trying.
But let me ask you this, Traci.
As well.
I have a question though. I want you to think about this because I've said this multiple times. Because I actually am not anti-police at all.
I don't believe you are. You don't come across like a
no. I'm not at all, and I'm not a violent person. I've never been involved in a violent protest in my life. But here's one thing I want to say, and a question I want to ask, and for people to think about, whoever watches this later, if anyone. When a teacher is found to be molesting children, like let's say a teacher is found out to be molesting their students.
A teacher or a preacher, you mean?
Either. Let's say a teacher, right? A public servant, someone who's being paid with our tax dollars, right? So that we're like on a level playing field, right? So
Amen.
teachers are paid with tax dollars, police are paid with tax dollars. When a teacher is discovered that they've been molesting children, do all the teachers band together to protect that person from being charged, from accountability, from culpability? Do all the teachers union, do they all band together to protect those teachers or that offender? Because I agree with you. I think most police officers work really hard and they're trying to do good. And sure, they have some inherent biases, because I've already said we all do. There's no way to get away from that. But I don't think that most officers are trying to go in with deadly force when it's not necessary, okay? I think there's some rogue officers that get a little, full of themselves with the power and the whatever. But why are these officers not saying, hey, this guy he used deadly force that's not allowed by our police force. It's literally written that they can't use these things, these forms of force, and he did this. That person needs to be terminated and they need to be charged with a crime, because they're actually not, that's illegal. It's not legal for that officer to be using that deadly force in that situation. We all know that because we've all got the same training. Why are those officers not standing up for the person that was murdered? Why are they standing up for the bad seed that's the murderer?
Again, I would say all cops are not, right?
No,
I don't
but
think.
I'm saying
I
as
mean, I remember the situation with the which I thought was so weird. The situation with the white guy, the little old white guy who walked in, up to those cops, and he got pushed down. His head was, hit the concrete, and then
yeah.
all of those officers band together to celebrate the two cops who. That was weird to me. I mean, that was definitely odd. And
And I shouldn't say like all cops. I'm just saying like the institution. Again, we're talking about leadership, right? We're talking about organizational leadership.
Yeah, a lot of the unions are saying it's about rights, it's about X, it's about Y. I hope we're having some to your point, courageous conversations as well as courageous activations, and things are happening that look different. And my hope is that we can effectuate change without, burning things down, and without,
Yeah.
loss of life, continued loss of life. I mean, I hear you. It's a very complex situation, and Miss Jen Sawyer, I just need to know how thrilled I am that you are part of this conversation. I ask that you be a part of it moving forward, because we need you. We need people like you. We're going to talk about what it means to be an ally, right? What it means to be a Jedi, what it means to be a diplomatic anti-racist. Oh, you didn't define that for us. Again, the guy who wrote the book about being an anti-racist is interesting. Why don't you share it with us before we go? Share with the audience. You're an ally. How do you connect being an ally with being an anti-racist? Do you have to be both?
Yeah, I would say yes.
So,
Because
so first define ally,
so
and then define anti-racist.
I think you could probably be an anti-racist without necessarily being an ally, but I think in order to be an ally, you have to be actively anti-racist, I think, to be an ally. Like, an anti-racist is just very simply someone who opposes racism, who doesn't believe that racism is right or should exist or should be condoned, right? So you could be an anti-racist and be like, yeah, racism is terrible, but to be an ally is to actually stand up and take a position where people of color maybe can't take a position for themselves, right? Like, it's to say, hey, I am in a place of privilege and I have power here, where even if there's a pushback or an implication of me standing up on your behalf, it's not going to be nearly as severe as you standing up for yourself. And I know that my position of privilege is always going to allow me to bounce back easier than a person of color, speaking out. So that to me is what allyship is. It's being willing to be the voice where the people who are being oppressed maybe can't have their own voice. And it's even being a voice for them when they're not present. It's like Christmas dinner. It's like, I'm being an ally in just trying to shift the narrative in my daily life change the way and the messages that my children are hearing, change the brainwashing, right? Change the brainwashing towards inclusivity and against this sort of systemic way that we talk about people in these categories of race and these preconceived notions that we continue to perpetuate in our culture. So that to me is what being an ally is it's saying, no, enough is enough, and I'm gonna speak out against this. That's different than being just anti-racist, because people can be like offended by racism and be like, oh yeah, I don't agree with racism, but that doesn't make you an ally. You have to take that next step to action. So I love that you're doing this.
I love it. I love you. I am grateful for you. Miss Jen, we will see you
Thank
again
you.
soon.
Thank
Do me
you.
a favor. Do me
Yes.
a favor. You said you completed some documentation. You did a training recently. Can you share that with me? And I would love to get on a call with you.
Oh, yeah.
And whatever the documentation was, I'd love to get on a call with you, and then we can host a follow-up conversation. I'd like to see maybe what part of that you could potentially share as a part of this conversation. Would you like that?
I'm willing to take a crack at it. And remember, I'm an evolving, learning ally. So
we all are.
sometimes.
Like I said, just if you could, I think we may have some content as well. I'm just kind of interested in how you tell the story. I've been very, very impressed with your level of engagement. You've exceeded my expectations in every way.
Love it. Okay.
So all I can say is thank you. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. And send me a gorgeous picture. I'm going to add you. I am going to add you to the, if you're okay, I'm going to add you to the panel on 9/9.
All righty, you got it. I will send you. We'll follow up. So thank you for making.
Would you be willing to send it to me like ASAP? Because I'm working on the flyer right now.
Sure, I'll do it right. I'll do it right now. Okay.
Awesome.
See you soon.
Thanks,
Traci.
Okay,
Take care. Bye bye.